Hello and welcome to Built on Broad, 50 Years of Frank, a 30-minute OwlSports Update production special that is 50 years in the making. During this time, we will take a look at Temple's fencing coach Dr. NIKKI Frank and her trailblazing career as she celebrates her 50th year at Temple University. I'm your host, Ray Dunne. To start, let's bring you to the beginning. Dr. Frank started the program in the 1972-73 school year. Within 6 years, she had her first All-American in Maureen Cernick in the foil. In the 1981-82 season, less than a decade after the program's inception, the program reached the Final Four for the first time. There would be 7 more trips, including the 1991-92 foil national championship team that we will cover later on in the show. She captured win number 500 on January 21, 2006, and is quickly closing in on her 900th career win. How do you sum up 50 years of coaching greatness? We're going to try our best by first taking a look at Frank through the years. From a young black woman in New York to her evolution as one of the best collegiate coaches of all time. We bring on OwlSports Update's AJ Patel to chronicle Dr. Frank's life.
Thanks, Ray. A pioneer in the sport of fencing, NIKKI Frank is the living embodiment of Temple tough. Throughout her 50 years of coaching and many years of competing, Frank has left an impression on just about everyone she meets, just about everywhere she goes. The biggest challenge in summing up NIKKI Frank's career is finding a place to start. All-American at Brooklyn College in the early 70s, a 2-time Olympian, 2-time national foil champion, but her trip to Temple in 1972 changed her life, while also changing many others in North Philadelphia. So many actually, it's just impossible to count. Frank started Temple's fencing program from scratch, while in school earning her master's in health education. She started Temple fencing as a club sport and then to the Division I varsity power we know today. When Frank took over, she was the first ever black woman to coach an NCAA fencing team. And she made it count. During her 50 years, Temple fencing has been the school's most consistent winner. A national team foil champion in 1992, a 21-1 record in 1994, a top 5 nationally ranking in 2020, just to name a few. Along the way, Frank picked up National Coach of the Year 4 different times, and she's been inducted into several Hall of Fames, including the International Hall of Fame, U.S. Fencing Hall of Fame, and of course, the Temple and Brooklyn Halls of Fame. As she approaches 900 career wins, her legacy won't be counted in wins and titles, but instead on the number of young women and women of color in particular that she has mentored over the years. Athlete, coach, and mentor with a roadmap through the sport of fencing that has lasted her a lifetime and impacted the lives of so many others. The winningest coach on campus looks to keep the momentum going into the 2021-2022 season, especially after only having 2 meets last year due to COVID. Frank and company will show what they are capable of with 6 regular season events after the new year. Reporting from the studio set, I'm AJ Patel. Ray, back to you on the desk.
Thank you, AJ. Before we delve any deeper into Dr. Frank's life, it's important to know the long history of fencing as it relates to race in this country. For that, we talked with Andy Shaw, a Temple alum, but also a fencing historian and chairman of the Fencing Hall of Fame in Louisiana. Black Americans have been fencing in New Orleans since the 1840s, but it was nearly a century later in 1939 when things began to change in Dr. Frank's native New York. Alec Hearn began coaching fencing at the YMCA in Harlem. He began to work with a black woman named Violet Barker, and she quickly became one of his best pupils. At the time, the U.S. Fencing Association, then called the Amateur Fencing League of America, was going to hand out a free membership to the winner of the Works Progress Administration Championship. Barker won the event and was mailed her membership to the AFLA. Upon receiving the membership, she sought to compete in a novice event at the New York Fencing Club. Once she arrived at the door of the event, she was told the event was for members only. After supplying her membership card, the man at the door ripped the card up and told her that she was not a member. Barker never fenced again. A decade later, Columbia University had 2 black fencers and was forced to withdraw entirely from an AFLA competition due to alleged threats. Within just a year of that event, the New York Fencing Club was the only club in the city to be decisively anti-black. It was a significant change in the sport's thinking. Dr. Franke picks it up from there in the late 60s as a fencer and into the early 70s as a coach. I sat down with Dr. Franke to talk about a wide range of topics, including her time at Temple, her career as a fencer, and her legacy. We started off with the idea for a women's fencing team at Temple in the early 70s.
They were actually easy conversations. At the time, men's and women's athletics were separate, and so there was a men's fencing team, but there was only a women's club. And so when I came here for graduate school, I was very naive, I think, and didn't understand why there wasn't a women's team, and went to the women's athletic director at that time and asked, and she was like, she didn't know why there wasn't one. And she says, well, if there's enough interest, we'll get one started. I think we started in '72, and with walk-ons, with some young ladies from other sports who, my first All-American was a field hockey player who came out after field hockey season because she had a friend who had come out. And the first couple of weeks, it was, you know, when we had practice, it was like, okay, tomorrow make sure you bring a friend with you. And that's how we built up our program at that time. And so going from walk-ons, no scholarships, to where we are today, it's like night and day.
What type of barriers existed for you as a black woman in New York to get into fencing in the 1960s?
There weren't many African-American fencers at the time when I started, but the few that were there were very, very good, and they were role models. And, you know, seeing them succeed, you know, seeing someone who looks like you succeed always is empowering and motivating. Tina Sloan Green was very instrumental in starting. I was one of the founding members of the Black Women in Sport Foundation, and we did a lot of work with young people because we both had a passion for exposing young people to non-traditional sports, and she really spearheaded that and was very much an influence in my life.
Team, can you take me through what it was like to be a part of the Boycott Olympics and what your experience was in that world?
It was a very frustrating time. At that time, there wasn't much funding for fencing from U.S. Olympic Committee, so everything you did, basically you financed. And I knew people who put their lives on hold, who for 4 years had trained, had paid to travel, paid to compete, paid for, you know, private lessons, and then at the last minute to have that taken away where you had absolutely no control over it was something that was very, very frustrating for a lot of athletes because we had worked really hard. To me, coaching is teaching. I always wanted to be a teacher. I was actually a full-time faculty member in the College of Public Health for many, many years until recently. And so, you know, Temple gave me the opportunity to do the 2 things I loved doing, which was teaching and coaching. And not many places would have given me that opportunity. And so I think that's what's kept me here, and just the students and, you know, wanting to see them grow and develop and leave here as productive citizens.
I'd like to once again thank Dr. Franke so much for talking with me. It's time for our first break of the show. When we come back, we'll take you to Manhattan's Seward Park High School and look at some of Franke's formative fencing years in the late 60s into the early 70s. Built on Broad, 50 Years of Franke. We'll be back. Welcome back to Built on Broad, 50 Years of Franke. Dr. Franke wasn't a fencer until her senior year of high school, but it's impossible to tell her story without retracing her steps growing up in New York City. OwlSports Update's Sage Hurley took the trip to Brooklyn and has this report.
From fencing at the Olympics in Montreal and qualifying for Moscow to building a 50-year program at Temple University in Philadelphia, Coach Franke's impact has been felt across the globe, but it all began in New York City. Coach Frank, then fondly known as NIKKI Tomlinson, began fencing at Seward Park High School in the Lower East Side, where she was classmates with Sammy Coker, who remembers her still.
We met in junior high school in 7th grade. When I learned later of her success, I was not surprised because she always seemed like a person who would accomplish whatever she set out to do.
The two signed each other's yearbooks and graduated in 1968.
Sammy, it's been a great 6 years. That's how I've always remembered her, with the smile.
But that wasn't the last Coker would hear of her.
I happened to be at work one day and I'm looking through one of the local paper in the sports section, and I see an article about U.S. fencing team, and I was like, oh, how nice. As I was turning the page, I looked down at the picture and I was like, oh my God, that looks like NIKKI. And I read the caption, and sure enough, it was.
After Coach Frank's time here at what once was Seward Park High School, she made her way to Brooklyn College, where she fenced and competed against Linda VOLLKOMMER, once a competitor, later a teammate, and now a lifelong friend. VOLLKOMMER is in her 48th year as head women's fencing coach at Stevens Institute of Technology. She coaches against Frank now, but they were once championship-winning teammates.
The Liberty Bells, Sharon Everson, NIKKI, Frank, maybe she was Tomlinson back then, I don't have an idea. Myself and Denise O'Connor, our coach. And we actually won the national championship in foil for women. As a competitor, her attitude and her spirit, it's someone you'd like to be friends with.
Coach Frank has been at Temple for 50 years now, but her impact still reaches far outside of Philadelphia city limits.
She's always given her time to make fencing better. She really believes in it. When you see two-time Olympian, and she's a model for people, they can look at her and say, wow, if she can do it, I can do it.
Reporting from New York City, I'm Sage Hurley. Ray, back to you.
The crowning achievement of Dr. Frank's coaching career came in 1992 when Temple Fencing captured the ultimate prize, a national title. As luck would have it, this team was inducted into the Temple Hall of Fame this past fall. We welcome in OwlSports Update's Jake Gable, who was at the event.
Thanks, Ray. I'm right outside the R-Mark Star Complex, where Temple inducted its 2020 Athletic Hall of Fame class, albeit 1 year late due to COVID. Among those inducted was the 1992 women's fencing team. Coached under NIKKI Frank, they won the program's first and only national title.
3, 2, 1, and then we're going to do 2 or 3 more, all right?
It was a class reunion of sorts, one fit for champions. The entire 1992 women's fencing team, coached by Dr. NIKKI Frank, was inducted into Temple Athletics Hall of Fame in early October. The 92 Owls went 17-1 and beat rival Penn State for the program's only fencing national championship.
NIKKI's motto, tough as nails, was repeated until it was ingrained in our minds and instilled as a conviction. We held ourselves and each other accountable to uplift and maintain all areas of our lives.
They were so close, and they were so supportive of each other and helpful of each other. And to this day, there's still some of them are very good friends. And so I think that's that bond and that camaraderie is something that Temple Fencing is all about, and it's something I'm very proud of.
Frank has been here before. She was inducted into the same Hall of Fame in 1995, just 3 years after winning that national title. Her goal tonight was to focus on the team, not the player.
We all know Coach Frank's impact as a fencing coach, but what really matters is her lasting impact on her players throughout their lives.
People ask that question, who's your inspiration in your life? NIKKI always comes to mind. She is unlike no other. She has paved the way for so many women, and me, I'm one of them. And I would not be where I am today if it wasn't for her and the rest of the team.
In 1992, the Owls only had 2 losses, both coming to rival Penn State. The two teams matched up again in the national championship, where the Owls won the one that mattered. I'm Jake Gable. Ray Dunne, back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Jake. It's time for us to take another break. Don't go anywhere as we still have a lot to get to. Coming up, we'll talk about Dr. Frank's Hall of Fame coaching career and the barriers she broke to get there. Built on Broad, 50 Years of Frank will return. Welcome back to Built on Broad. When Dr. Frank arrived on Temple's campus 50 years ago, she was already breaking down barriers. I spoke to Dr. Timothy Welbeck, the director of Temple University's anti-racism research and a civil rights attorney, about just how difficult and unique Dr. Frank's pursuits were in the early 1970s. We also talked about how she blazed a path for more black women trying to make a difference.
So the era of which Dr. Frank grew up was one of radical change across the country. So she literally saw the death of Jim Crow, in that we saw the legal unraveling of Jim Crow with Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. That's in 1954. And so much of her formative years is when the nation is undergoing radical reformation of its societal orders. Most women at the time were pushed into things like cheerleading, if they even did that. And a lot of the athletic components of cheerleading weren't introduced even at that moment. So for her to find her way into a sport, just in and of itself as a young woman, in and of itself is exceptional. If a black woman is excelling against all odds, then that means that the justifications for holding them back and creating these impediments no longer are viable. And so she then is going to be a target of ridicule, of animus and hate, and even direct threats of violence. And so we are living at that time, living in an era where athletes are kidnapped and held hostage. We're in an era where political figures are assassinated or become political prisoners. And so the threat of violence is real. So Dr. Frank had to also carry that weight with her at the time as well. Dr. Frank is a leader of leaders. And when you think about the idea that she's a woman who broke barriers in terms of getting an education, a post-secondary education, the fact that she gets a PhD and before that a master's and got a graduate degree in the eras that she did is truly extraordinary. And then for her to dominate at every conceivable level in fencing and to have started so late. She starts her last year in high school and then comes onto the scene and becomes one of the most formidable forces within the entire sport. And then she gets a second career as a coach and prepares the next generation of fencers to go forth and do the same and literally creates a program at a premier institution and then makes that one of the elite programs in all of the sport across the country. So in each of those facets, she's trailblazed an opportunity for women, particularly black women as coaches at the collegiate level, particularly at a time when women's sports were an afterthought and receiving little budget, little attention, and little resources otherwise from universities, actually competing in a sport where many black women are not even thought of to being able to compete, and then also to be an educator and to be a thought leader in the realm of public health. She truly is a remarkable woman. She's lived a full life. It's truly appropriate to celebrate her in this way, and it's fitting in that few people ever have an opportunity to have the level of influence in one area, but for her to do it in multiple areas is tremendous.
The impact Dr. Welbeck speaks of is something that is so far-reaching and a major part of Dr. Frank's story and legacy. Speaking of legacy, Dr. Frank isn't just excited about those she has coached over the last 50 years, she also focuses on the next generation. We welcome OwlSports Update's Lindsay Moppert to the desk.
Thank you, Ray. NIKKI Frank's legacy has been documented and acknowledged in so many ways over the years, but she doesn't stop there. Frank, along with a group of other female black community leaders, is working to ensure the next generation's success.
NIKKI Frank, the name that is commonly associated with all types of honors, awards, and success stories in the sport of fencing. But with her own athletic resume and a 50-year coaching legacy, Frank is leaving a generational impact on those she has helped along the way.
For the fact of the matter of her sustainability in that sport and being able to be the coach for that long, I mean, testifies within itself.
Frank and her teams have totaled 874 victories in NCAA competition, making her the winningest coach the sport has ever seen.
She's passionate about her sport, fencing, and she's passionate about teaching and coaching. So that makes her a real prize package.
She has been inducted into the Brooklyn College Hall of Fame, the Temple University Athletics Hall of Fame, the United States Fencing Association Hall of Fame, and the International Sports Hall of Fame. Not to mention, Frank is a co-founder of the Black Women in Sport Foundation, along with Dr. Alpha Alexander, Tina Sloan Green, and Linda Cheryl Green. And because of her record and reputation for greatness, NIKKI Frank will always have a home in this hallway alongside many other Temple legends long after she stops coaching. The titles are there, but it's the young women she's mentored and continues to mentor that will live on well past her time at Temple.
A teacher committed to the lifelong success of her athletes as human beings. That's really NIKKI Frank's legacy.
The Black Women in Sport Foundation is based in Philadelphia, and their doors are always open. You can reach out to them online at blackwomeninsport.org. And as they say in their motto, from the playing fields to the boardroom, it's their goal to increase involvement in young Black female athletes in all aspects of sport.
Thanks, Lindsay. It's time for our final break of the show. When we come back, our very own Eric Jesberger takes us up to Boston to see what some Temple fencing alumni are up to now. Built on Broad, 50 Years of Frank. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Built on Broad, 50 Years of Frank. They say that imitation is the greatest form of flattery. For a coach, seeing his or her former players take the leap to coaching could be the most rewarding. OwlSports Update's Eric Jesberger had the chance to speak with a pair of Dr. Frank's former fencers, one just down the street and one 6 hours to the north in Boston. Eric joins us now from the studio set.
Thanks, Ray. NIKKI Frank has gone by many titles over the course of her fencing career. No title fits her legacy better than the word coach. To the ones who had the privilege of calling her by that title, their lives continue to be forever impacted by Coach Frank's mentorship and guidance. Some of the best ways to describe a coach: a leader, a mentor, even a friend.
Nice job, my dear.
Being a coach can include a long job description. The most significant part of a coach's job is the impact it has on the athletes themselves.
Especially for being a collegiate coach, I think it's just to kind of help guide your athletes to starting their professional careers, not just as athletes, but also going into the workforce soon. Nice job, Emma.
Coach NIKKI Frank's success has transcended her athletes' careers at Temple.
Just got a call from Coach Frank. She was just like, we need a saber coach, we need someone to come help out, and I was more than happy to help. I thought she was just calling me to catch up, and then all of a sudden she offers me a job, and I was like, yes, I'll take it.
Some alumni have placed roots down in the Philadelphia area, but some, however, have traveled a little bit farther.
Brandeis took a leap of faith with me because although I had a great pedigree of success training athletes, they had to believe that I could do that.
The Temple product, who resides on a boat in the Boston Harbor, took her Coach Frank lessons to Brandeis University, 20 minutes outside of Boston, where she's coached since 2018 and has earned accolades similar to that of her playing days.
The first time I got the opportunity to talk to NIKKI, I mean, there was an instant just awe, and I knew that I would love to have the opportunity to train under her.
NIKKI Frank's ideology has touched the lives of her players, who have taken NIKKI's spirit into their communities, opening up gyms such as Coach Salmon's Mission Fencing Center in New York, and teaching the Coach Frank way to the present
Okay, the hand comes out here.
And future of the sport.
You know, why people come into your life and how you're lucky in that way, I don't know, but the fact that NIKKI, you know, chose me so many years ago to be part of her program, and that she has continued to be my mentor and my friend all this time, it's shaped my life. And I mean, it's the point where she's family, and then she's more than that. Thank you, Nikki, for giving us our sisterhood and that we always have each other. And there's really nothing like what you've created here at Temple. It's amazing. No one can ever match it.
NIKKI Franke has coached close to 1,000 fencers at Temple during her 50-year journey, developing her athletes into successful individuals and maybe more importantly, off the fencing strip just as much as on it. Reporting from the studio set, I'm Eric Jessberger. Ray, back to you at the desk.
Thank you, Eric. That is all the time we have for today's show. We want to give a special thanks to Andy Shaw and Denise O'Connor for all of their help throughout this process. Congratulations to Dr. NIKKI Franke on her 50 years at Temple University, and thank you once again for speaking with us. For our executive producer, Haley Palmer, who created this show, our reporters, and our entire staff, thank you to everyone who helped make this special possible. I'm Ray Dunne, and this has been Built on Broad, celebrating 50 years of Franke.
One word would be my mentor and my mom. I always call her mom.
Well, I always say when I grow up I want to be Dr. NIKKI Franke.
Her legacy is that of a teacher more than a coach, a teacher committed to the lifelong success of her athletes as human beings. That's really NIKKI Franke's legacy.
I mean, she has been the best mentor I could ever have, both professionally and fencing-wise. And she's just, even when I was on the team, she's just taught me to be a better person.